I am a first-generation settler from Polish and German ancestor. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I live and have been privileged to call my home for the last 20 years is the unceded territory of the Algonquin-speaking peoples and the Esquimalt, Songhees, and Wasanic peoples, who have cared for the lands and waters of this territory for millennia, and whose historical relationship with the land continues today. So I now welcome Grace to continue on with her introductions and to the session today. So Grace, please.
Thank you, Gertie. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm also a first-generation settler living on unceded Cowichan tribes land. And just to note that this is one of the largest indigenous populations in British Columbia. And I'm very grateful that they share their wisdom very generously in partnership with other citizens and scientists and levels of government to care for the land and water for the good of everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think that, well, in the words of Chief Seattle, humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. So there's more than half of the Earth's population, 4 billion people, currently live in cities, and that could increase to 75% in just 30 years. There's tremendous pressure on almost every city to constantly grow and to spread both up and out. So we're all seeing an accelerating loss of nature. At the same time, we're learning more and more about how essential nature is to our health and our well-being. Here in BC, more than 600 people died during the 3-day heat dome in 2021. And in Europe last summer, more than 20,000 people died from the intense heat. Smoke from wildfires in recent years has sometimes reduced air quality along the west coast of North America to among the most polluted in the world. Yet we are also learning more and more about the importance of nature, and that trees, for instance, can cool city air significantly and also filters air pollution. So nature in the city can truly save lives. The coroner's report on the BC heat dome deaths noted that many of those who died were living in neighborhoods where there was very little green space or trees. But in many cities, there's so much pressure. Like BC is going to be legislating that up to 4 units of housing can be built on any single residential lot in the province, starting in the fall. So that'll mean a lot of trees will be taken down and green space will be eliminated. So thank you all for joining us today. And I look forward to hearing what our panelists have to say. The first person to speak is Chiyokten Wagner, who's a member of the Wasanich First Nation on Vancouver Island and now lives in Seattle. He's been speaking out on social environmental issues since he was a child, which took him to COP21 in Paris. And he is a strong protector of the land and water who has stood on the front lines in places like Fairy Creek and Standing Rock. Chiyokten is also an award-winning musician, a cultural educator, and a strong advocate of the ancient teachings of the circle of life. I'm honored that you can join us. Chiyokten, please go ahead.
CM Grace and all the organizers who put this together, an important topic matter in our today's world, you know, and we're working to stay healthy and within ourselves and around us. You know, it's always a lot of work. And so I just want to introduce myself in our language, OCM, Nastjela CM, Moxane OCM, Genuite Punchquiliquence, Atia Squachel CM, Nastjela Chiyokten, Sina Snat Chalatson at Husainich, Aithla OCM, Masi, Iason Tachel Suhela, OCM, Quam Sali, Slit Kathit, Salt Seat Lai, Moxane, Slachan the Seatlini, the Quais, the Sios, OCM, Masi. Just saying hello, and I have good feelings in my heart today. And I'm Chiyokten from Kwasanich, and I'm also Cowitson. My grandmother was Cowitson, or Cowichan, they say today. Yeah, just strength for the work, and bless all of our elders, children, and air, water, and food. And yeah, you know, there's so much to the ancient ways of our people that we don't see anymore, and the things that we worked with are not present. To consider how we kept balance is important. And if we're going to talk about wellness for the natural beings, well, we have to talk about our wellness. And because we know that we are part of the sacred breath of Mother Earth, even in the name of our tribe, Husanich. It begins with breath, a sound that's not in English, like you're gently blowing out a candle. And that speaks of our connection to all the sacred beings, Sisiwis or Sisiwin, the sacred breath and sacred life of Mother Earth. And that we are unseparated with that, we're part of it. And so to consider those ancient knowings and the separation of our human people now today, and that some people believe they don't even need their Mother Earth, and they have absorbed a lie, a construct that no longer gives love, gives medicine, gives sacredness, and a sacred promise to hold a sacred relationship with these beings that keep us alive, as we spoke of the Skalelnach, the trees, the Hahakwa, the sacred water. And also I'm founder of Protectors of the Salish Sea, an indigenous-led organization to basically stop fossil fuel or return wellness to ourselves and our mother. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, but I really believe that that we have the ability to change ourselves. Even the name of our creators, House, where I live, Dokwiba, the sacred one, the sacred changer. We're all born of change. And anyone ever, can you name one thing that doesn't change? I don't think anyone can. And even in current science, they know everything is changing every nanosecond. Our bodies are changing. We're not the same fiber that we were a second ago. And so we have to change. We have to be able to change and heal ourselves. And in these cities, you know, we don't see many trees, do we? We don't see the water. We don't see those natural animals that we gave those sacred relationships to. Often we see the opposite of that. As we know, we see diesel trucks and buildings and glass and concrete and steel, a lot of those things, and those sacred beings are no longer there. So how do we improve that that relationship with the mother that's underneath that blacktop? There's a lot of different ways, of course, but I feel that education should be the first thing. That if people understand how we co-created paradise here, because we don't live any differently than we do now. We all depend on water. We all depend on all of the elements and our sacred mother to live. It's just we have different tools now and a different construct and a different governance. So if we want to return to a place of wellness, we need to take a look at ourselves and our connection to the land. And do we feel that we belong to the land, that we have a responsibility to the land and the water, that we are part of the land and water? Those are things that we need to reconsider, because in settler colonial world, they never ever spoke that. Those words have never been spoken. And not until very recently, those are the words of our ancient people. And we need to sit and listen. I believe that someday, soon, I really pray that the words of our people can be heard everywhere. Then no, you won't have to seek out one of our people to how do we even hear our voice, or maybe we search the internet. But maybe someday there'll be places for throughout the city or inside of their education systems that will lift up the voice of our ancient people who co-created paradise everywhere around us. And so that's my prayerful vision. But certainly we never killed any trees. We didn't kill the ancient giants. We didn't even go out and kill hardly any small trees, because the firewood we used that was all from windfall. And the ancient forest was always at our back. And the Shchana, the Salish Sea, or when the tide's out, the table is set, where we would get so much of our food in the time of wellness inside of us and around us. And that was a heartbeat ago, 170 years ago here. So it was a blink of an eye ago. And if all of that can change, if all of that amazing bounty and the loving relationship and the lifting up of the human hands and the heart, human spirit and the human heart and the human body, and lifting up all the other beings, if we could do that for thousands of years, and we did, and then all that can change in reverse and flip on its head now when the settler colonial world has come. And if all that can happen in a blink of an eye, then we can change it also very fast to a place of restoration. And we can restore our own spirits. We can heal our spirit, our human spirit, a loving spirit, a spirit that loves all beings, all life. We can restore that, re-indigenize ourselves, holistically heal ourselves, and then take a look at this world. And we can holistically heal this world that same way. And we can do that in a fairly fast way if education changes. If education were to change today, right now, and every child was to sit with our ways often and hear the words of our ancient people, then it would change in a generation. It would change in one generation if they were to often sit with our wisdom keepers, traditional wisdom keepers. And so, yeah, how to bring wellness to the city is an interesting construct, and I've had those thoughts myself. I've had those thoughts that we should always remember. We should always remember that there was water flowing. The reason why these cities are there is because they were our prime village sites. Every city is a prime village site that was stolen from our people after the genocide of our people. And here in the Salish Sea, they're all ports and bays. And of course, we're going to utilize, us First Peoples are going to utilize those harbors and bays because there's strategic points, and there's gentle land to the water. We can launch our canoes and do all the work that we do. And so to think about that, we need to heal that as well. And yeah, just returning to how we can restore the water paths in a city. I believe they should be located and mapped and then placed on the streets. We have non-toxic paint. We can see where the water flows. It flowed before the concrete landed in the glass and steel, and all of that landed, and we could just paint them in there with sacred beings along the way, and people could take a look and go, oh, look what was here. Look at all the water. Look at all these sacred beings. Where are they today? Are they here? Well, if they're not, then we can work on them, because I know the children want to. The minute you speak like this to the child, they're like, wow, I could help restore this place. I love all these beings, and I want to be their friend and be their protector, and to stand for them, and to be their voice for them, and to help them come back to our sacred lands of our first peoples. And so to begin by identifying these sacred areas of water where springs water flowed from the ground, and springs came up, and even restore a few of them, and show people where these sacred things are. Those are good beginnings. I believe pervious asphalt is a really good friend. It's basically, you see them around trees now, and when it rains, and instead of having to have the concrete all cracked and sticking up, now they just put in this pervious concrete, and water just drops right into it, and then the tree grows, and you don't have to dig up the concrete. I think we could do more and more things like that, and places where plants can live, and of course, in some countries they have the entire buildings are cropped with outcropped with trees and plants, and the cities stay cool, and they stay. It reduces the climate disaster effect that cities perpetuate and exasperate because of the very hot conditions of concrete, glass, and steel. So anyway, yeah, I believe it begins with ourselves, and I just want to make that point. And then it begins with indigenous wisdom and knowledge that our voices need to be at the forefront, because all of this has happened before on Mother Earth. We have such long memory and history. The world had fallen in the time of the animal people, and humans were brand new, and the world burned, and it was our sacred promises that we made to each and every being to hold a sacred relationship, and sacred games that ended all war and destruction, that called Slahal, that allowed our people to rebuild paradise. So we've rebuilt paradise in the past, and we can do it again. Our first peoples have that knowledge. Our people hold the roadmap to paradise. And what I've seen from colonialism, their roadmap looks like a train wreck so far. So we've proven that we have those roadmaps, and certainly we can apply them to current situations. And so I'll just leave it there, and I just want to give gratitude again, Iska, for sharing the voice, being able to give just a voice. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chiyokten. I really appreciate what you're saying about the importance of water and restoring streams and creeks. And I just want to mention that Creatively United for the Planet is showing a film this evening that we can post the link for that about the Columbia River that runs from BC into the States. That looks really interesting, and maybe Francis can tell us a bit about it later. But right now I'm just going to introduce Malia Acker, who is kind enough to join us, even though she's on location doing an Earth Day walk at another place. Malia is an environmental writer, a researcher, and author of 3 poetry collections, and she holds a PhD in geography. She's a lecturer at UVic and also at Thompson Rivers University. Malia wrote a nonfiction book about the indigenous stewardship and current restoration of the endangered Garryoak Meadow ecosystem. Her book is called Gardens of Flame, Garryoak Meadows of BC's South Coast. And she's going to tell us today about her experience of growing native plants in her yard in Esquimalt, I think. Or Victoria, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Grace. Can you hear me okay? Yep, great. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. I have a few slides to show you. And so I wrote Gardens of Flame to explore some of the restoration that was happening in the Garryoak Meadows around the South Coast on Vancouver Island, as well as to talk about the traditional uses of those meadows by First Nations. I should mention that I'm coming to you from the Simca Nation up in the Clearwater Valley this week, because I'm part of the Land Conservancy's seminar called Deer Trails, where we're teaching young naturalists. So that's where I am right now. But most of this concerns South Coast ecosystems. So as many of you may know, Garryoak Meadows have camas as one of their primary flowers, and they were a flower that was of incredible importance to First Nations. It was harvested as a carbohydrate source. Sir James Douglas remarked that the area around Victoria looked like an Eden that had fallen from the sky. He thought it was a wilderness, when in fact it was a very highly managed landscape that was burned every season or every year, and maintained for high production of food, which was traded up and down the coast. And there were shallow soil sites like we found at Mount Suhalem, but there were also lots of deep soil sites, which was one of the primary reasons that Douglas chose Victoria as the primary harbor, because it had so much deep soil around it. There was managed camas landscape, and of course most of that disappeared when urbanization and colonization happened. Since then, there's been a lot of attempts to restore and protect the little bit of Garryoak habitat that's left on the South Island. There's about 4% or a little bit less at this point left. People are doing invasive species removal. They're taking out broom and invasive ivy and blackberry and restoring these ecosystems back to some semblance of what they were before. They're also starting to do some controlled burning again in places like the Cowichan Preserve, which is owned by the Nature Conservancy of BC or managed by that organization. And that's helping to take out some of the thatch that's accumulated from invasive grasses and bring the meadow back to a semblance of health again, and allow the native species to have a chance. So there's some really interesting stuff happening in terms of large scale restoration in parks and in nature preserves around the South Island. This is what used to be present. That was Garryoak Meadow in the green you can see here. And those were the original meadows around the time of Douglas's arrival. And the red that you see is what's left, although this map, as I'll show you in a little bit, is not quite accurate anymore because a lot of this over here is disappearing, as you may know. A lot of what's left in terms of Garry Oak habitat is disappearing under development. This was Channel Ridge on Salt Spring Island. This is what it looks like, or it looked like a few years ago. Of course, when they tear off the top layer, what ends up coming in instead is in huge pockets of invasive broom, which is really a game changer for the soils. It adds a lot of nitrogen, prevents some of the lower nitrogen feeding species like native wildflowers from staying healthy, and the seeds themselves can stay dormant in the soil for over 50 years. So it often turns into a kind of moonscape. This is Salt Spring again. And of course, a lot of what's been happening out in Langford has exacerbated the problem even more. You'll note that about 15% in the last 10 years has been lost in the Langford area. And so when we look at this map, areas like this and this around Langford Lake and around Langford proper are no longer Garry Oak meadow ecosystems. They look more like this. This is where I did some camas and fawn lily restoration, or salvaging, I should say, about a year and a half ago. Many of those plants are now living in my boulevard because there was no room for them in Langford anymore. And this is what Langford is turning into. This is a picture of West Hills. So there's not a lot of habitat left when urbanization is happening in these outlying communities, which is what makes it particularly important that those of us who have the luxury of living on properties that are 5,000 square feet or more and have smaller houses do as much as we can to cultivate and steward native species on our own properties, and to provide habitat for native species as much as we can. This is a garden in Gonzales Bay. You can see the native Western Columbine and lots of camas here. This is another photo of it. So you can see that it's very possible to cultivate these species within urban environments, and they're creating what's called refugia, which are small parcels of native habitat that can really support a diverse network of pollinators and birds and all sorts of creatures, as well as providing seed banks for future plantings. And here's another, this is a garden in Oak Bay. This woman, the first year she bought her property about 30 years ago, her husband was away, and so there was nobody there to mow the lawn, thank goodness. And the whole thing came up in fawn lilies and then in camas. And so they've never mowed it since. And that accident was, that was the precedent for the cultivation and care of her own yard. But that kind of thing, I think, is not normally what we see in a yard in Oak Bay. But we really need to redefine what we call not even a managed, but a good-looking landscape, urban landscape or suburban landscape. And we have to let go of the whole Kentucky bluegrass ecosystem and the idea that things have to be tidy in order for them to work well. This kind of messiness, I think, is really needed in order to cultivate more biodiversity in these smaller areas, because parks just aren't enough anymore, not with climate change, not with heat domes. So we need to take it upon ourselves too. So this is my own yard, and I'll just tell you quickly the story of what I've gone through in the last few years. I did this as part of the research for the Garry Oak book, Gardens of Flame. So in the first year, I let everything grow long, irritated my neighbors to no end, and so put up a fence eventually so they wouldn't have to look at it. And I wanted to see if there's anything in the grass that was native and left over. There wasn't. And so what I did was planted a hedgerow, a native hedgerow around the outside edges of salmonberry, Pacific ninebark, snowberry, that kind of thing, Nuka rose. A lot of them I just got from cuttings, and you'll see that some of them are leafing out right here. So you don't even have to go and buy plants. You can just stick cuttings into the ground, make sure they're well watered, and they'll root themselves. This is year 2 of that plot. You can see my irate neighbor on the other side of the fence there that he built specifically hide my yard from him. So these leaf out fairly quickly. There's also red osier dogwood in here, which has since really taken hold. But really wonderful fodder, food for birds and habitat for birds. I have a lot of nesting insects, birds. I've had salamanders and lots of different edible mushrooms as well that have come up with their own accord. Here's the hedgerow in year 3. So you can see one of the basic ways of going about this, it really is to stop trying to control everything. The only thing that's really necessary in these instances is to remove the invasive species that are there and let everything else be and do what it wants to do. And you'll find that these are the plants that are meant to be growing here, and they're accustomed to this temperature and these climates. They do extremely well. They go dormant in the late summer, and you don't have to clean them up. You just let them be. So these are bulb plots of camas and fawn lily and shooting star that I've salvaged from various plots. I belong to the Salish Native Plant Salvage Group, which you can also join, and they send you information about developments that are happening, and you can come and salvage species off the property before it gets developed. Bulb plots in year 3, so you can see they're starting to develop. And of course, I was working with a very small budget, so I didn't restore everything all at the same time. I was a PhD student at the same time, so you can see there's still cultivated grasses around the edge here. So I just did bit by bit, but just to give you an example of how things have grown, this is a Gary oak tree that you can see here in the background. It's about maybe 10 inches tall there, and it's now 16 feet tall. So when you plant them and you treat them well, they actually grow quite fast and do quite well. This was my first fawn lily. It came up in the spring of probably 2012, I think. And I now have over a dozen that are blooming on the property, which is really nice in the spring. This was my house when I first started. You can see the plantings of the native hedgerow here and some of the cultivated grass, and then sheet mulching that I was doing, which is basically just laying, making a bed with layers of cardboard and mulch and leaves and compost and so on. And that way you don't have to remove anything, you just smother it and start fresh. By year, I think this is year 3, things have started to grow up quite a lot, which is really nice. And then 2 years ago, there's the house behind there. You can see it's completely disappeared. And now, of course, it's absolutely gone. This was a boulevard tree I got Salish to plant. It's also a native Gary oak. So the hedgerow does incredibly well. And the interior is also doing extremely well. There's lots of shade plants, including oxalis, and then lots of bushes like mock orange that I've planted as well that provides lots of food and nesting material for insects and birds. The camas you can see here. But I started running out of space. You can see it's starting to get quite crowded. This is the path to my front door. And so I moved out onto the boulevard 2 springs ago. And with the restoration material that I got from that Langford site you saw in the pictures, I took the entire length and width of the boulevard and have transformed it into native plants, Gary oak meadow habitat as well. So you can see little plantings of moss and Pacific blue, I think it's actually I've forgotten the species. It's Pacific bluegrass or something, I think. Anyways, fawn lilies, shooting stars. There's still some non-native grasses here because there's camas coming up in between them. But by later in spring, it does quite well, and you can see lots of different stuff coming up in here. This is a meadow that gets kind of half-day sun, and it gets very, very dry by midsummer, but it has never been watered. it's gone the whole season all on its own. This is sea blush you can see coming in here. So it's very, very low maintenance. I usually cut down the old flower stems in March of every spring, but other than that, I leave it completely on its own. You can see there's some non-native flowers coming in. So the main thing again is to remove anything that's not native, but you can see shooting stars coming up as well. And this is the sidewalk. So my sense is that I've always gone by the CRD's idea that nature needs half. That was when I was on the Parks Advisory Board a few years ago, and we came up with that goal. So my backyard is has some native species, but mostly it's dedicated to food. And then the front yard is food for other species than myself. And I think that's how we're going to survive. There doesn't seem to be any time left for us to be hesitating any longer about rethinking our notions of what is beautiful and what is tidy and what works in a city. We need to move forward with planting as much of these native species as we possibly can. Okay, so I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Malia. And I just want to say, if you have questions for Malia, she needs to leave by about 3:15. So maybe put your hand up quickly after we start questions. And now I'd just like to introduce Daniela Puric-Mladenovic, who's an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. She holds a PhD in forestry. Her work and research provide real-world solutions and tools that support strategic conservation, restoration, and integrated spatial planning of urban forests, green and natural areas in the urban landscape. Daniela also leads research forest monitoring and a community-based urban forest stewardship and monitoring program called Neighborwoods. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in urban forest conservation, green infrastructure, and landscape ecology, among other things. Please go ahead, Daniela.
Yeah, thank you so much for the nice introduction, and thank you everyone. And my two panel members, amazing talks, I have to say, and a really nice introduction in what I'm going to talk to you about. It's just let me share my screen, make sure the technology cooperates with me. So I hope you can see the slides. We were saying about half of urban world population lives in urban areas, and in Canada, we have 80% of our population. We are very, very urban nation, even though we are the second country in the world based on our size, and we are considered like a country that has a lot of natural areas, but we are very, very urban. And these urban areas typically follow the southern portion of Canada, where the soils are deeper, climate is better. From time to time, we have towns that are up north. So just let me see if, oh, my slides. Okay, so, and what's going on within urban area, as I would say in the past 10 years, we see all these different names like green infrastructure, we talk about that. We talk about green areas, parks, ecosystem restoration. The latest buzzword, I'm sorry for that, it's a nature-based solution, climate change, biodiversity loss, and all of these. And to be honest, sometimes I think in our desperation to do something, we just recreate new words for the same problems that we've been having for quite long time. Going back long time ago, 1800s, examples I can use from Southern Ontario, the landscape that was 90% forest cover came to 10% within less than one generation. So the settlers and the colonial land cleaning left Southern Ontario pretty much without forest cover, 10%. Within that, the urban areas were popping up, but still, they were not that huge, except perhaps a few ones. After the Second World War, the urban areas just exploded and mushroomed. And the main problem, it's one of the problems beside, like, I'm a plant person, but the main problem is the way how we develop the land. The land where it's taken for granted, the large parcels. And just an example from Toronto 1950s, where these large parcels were settled. And for many years, this type of development has followed until we got into the policies, which are very similar across Canada, that we need to increase density. Unfortunately, what has happened, the density has increased, and that's only the benefit to developers, because not the amount of green areas has grown or anything like that. It's the same land development pattern from 1950s that we see still to this day. And often what, at least for my lectures, I would use these examples where we promote, oh, it's a new subdivision in a wood area. And often they will have so many names that imply that this is natural setting and something that looks green, but this is the reality. These are the slums of Canadian slums within urban, with infrastructure, yes, but not appropriate green infrastructure, and I will explain why. So this is the way how we develop now. This is not efficient for many reasons. Because probably one of the main reasons is this, because we destroy soil. All of these subdivisions that developed, the land gets leveled off, and the best part of soil, horizons A and B, get removed. And then we go and we plant trees and we try to fix and make it green. It's just, to be honest, waste of resources. And trees in these type of soils, they live about 30 years because there is no soil. It's a bedrock. And this is at least across, I know for sure Southern Ontario, but I know it's very similar in other parts of Canada. Why I say Southern Ontario? Because that's where we have the highest pressure. So when you have trees planted in something like this is what happens after 15 years, decline, and we get the disposable trees, the roots get exposed. And the development that it's something like this in a country that it's a G7, it's just mind-blowing. Even like a ginkgo, which we say, yeah, it's non-native and so on. Even those few species will not survive into something like this. And one wonders how to bring nature into this. Often we find downtown Toronto, the only species that survive there, it's invasive tree of heaven. And one wonders how it does that. Beside development going outside of the urban areas and destroying on its pathway everything that it's natural, the huge problem is, if you remember those properties from 1950s and even earlier from early 1900s, larger land parcels, which I know it's the problem in Victoria, in Vancouver, in Ottawa. Now we are going and redeveloping. And that redevelopment goes where the closed, nice canopy gets removed, so bigger homes are built. So one of my students did analysis where we did the estimates, how many big trees are removed to develop these homes. And someone will say, oh yeah, that's like, yeah, you know, it's one parcel, but the problem is cumulative effect. It's a fine nibbling of the green space and the canopy. And as I just heard what Grace said, we have the same problem in Ontario and in Toronto, where yes, we need the housing to go up, and mind you, I'm a plant person, but this has an impact on green space. It's a primitive development. It's a parcel by parcel without thinking. Yes, we have to redevelop. We have to rethink how our urban areas are green, but this is not a good approach, because again, the cumulative effect, it's enormous, it's huge. So with all fairness, for the past, all our land use development, it was, you got it, you grab it, colonial approach. There is so much, there is no need to think, there is no need for stewardship. Not that I support that, but it's just the mentality that there is so much abundance that we can go, oh, there is an opportunity to develop. It's ad hoc development without the planning. Even if we have some policies, they are very reactive, and often they are ineffective. And regardless if we are talking about land parcel or we are talking about larger cities, we still, not our group, but decision makers, with all fairness, still perceive that nature as disposable commodity, something that it's replaceable. Our development hugely contributed to land degradation. Million examples that we can give, and we heard what Malia said. I have million examples like that. What Paul said, it's just the brutal way. The evidence is there within and around the cities. We try to talk about the post-development and so on, but I'll be honest, I think we have more glossy strategies and papers and nice web pages than anything else, but where the rubber hits the road are policies, policies of early 1900s, even not 1950s, with all fairness. They're not following the time. Our land use planning is not following that. And this is just a recent example from Ontario, where our green belt, which was protected by policy, now Auditor General, has issues. Was that land bought by developers? So who is planning our landscapes? That's a question. Communities in Toronto, some of the communities try to resolve these problems and save trees, but the effort is so enormous. And there are so many hoops and loops that sometimes one wonders how those people have energy. And all of them are volunteers, pure community volunteers. You know, along what Paul said, there is a solution, and it wouldn't take a second. It wouldn't take, you know, if you remember when I came to Canada was at the time when was the smoking policy, at least in Ontario, and everyone was throwing tantrum and so on, but now it's part of the culture. The point being that the good policy, that it's really led to professionals and to the community, not to politicians and decision makers, could make a huge impact, and very, very quickly. By no means conservation is the way to go. What we have to keep, manage, and definitely strategic restoration, not planting trees so politicians can cut the ribbon. That's, you know, it's expensive and not necessarily the best way. Strategic restoration, but all of that within urban and peri-urban landscape cannot be successful without combining it with land use planning. If it's without land use planning, because land use planning drives what's happening, and thinking big systems, green systems, where what we want to see on our landscape, reknitting and reconnecting. Of course, without public engagement and people and social value, that would be very, very hard to do. And again, that shouldn't be left to any politician, any decision maker, any government. They're there just for 4 years. And as an example, an oak tree, let's say white oak in Ontario, lives about 450 years. That's 65 governments. until now, since settlement, let's say in Ontario, we had 7 generations. That's a half lifespan with an oak. But we managed with our short-term thinking prior to destroy pretty much anything that we touch. And I would say everything until, let's say, 90s, to some degree, I could justify, but with the explosion of internet and knowledge sharing, everything it's just pure ignorance, and that ignorance come again into policy and land use planning. There are good examples across the globe. Maybe they're not perfect by no means, and they're good examples in many cases because many, in particular European cities, they reached the bottom, the threshold where there is no way around. But some of the policies that were created, let's say for Copenhagen 5-finger plan, they started developing that policy in 1930s. That's a very long time to develop something. But again, we have examples that we can use to learn more how we are developing our cities. The basic problem is that we have to envision green and then develop, because a house can be built in 2-3 months, while going back to our trees, when you think like something, takes a long time for trees to grow. So one of the problems that needs to be addressed, it's definitely land use planning and changing the policies and doing integrated land use planning where green areas, green infrastructure, whichever name we use, has to be at the forefront of development. And again, to be led to the professional and led by the community, because without the community stewardship and engagement, it would be hard, to defend. So again, there are many good examples across the globe. I do think that we should do a good job. There are many individual efforts, and again, based on communities, but in terms of our policies, in terms of our governance, I don't think that we are doing a good job.
Thank you, Daniela. And now I'd like to introduce Herb Hammond.
Daniela, could you stop sharing your screen, please?
Herb is an award-winning author, a forest ecologist, and a retired forester with 40 years of experience in research, industry, teaching, and consulting. He's best known for his restoration work using a concept that he calls nature-directed stewardship. Herb has developed more than 25 ecosystem-based conservation plans across Canada and in other parts of the world, often working with indigenous people or with rural communities. He is currently co-authoring a book on applying nature-directed stewardship to restore urban areas called Inviting Nature Home, Putting Nature First in Cities. He's also working on another book about our place in the complex fabric of nature with assistance from indigenous collaborators. Herb hopes to describe a new reality for settler cultures, a reality that is necessary for our survival, and how to get there in the face of climate emergency. Thank you, Herb.
All right, thank you, Grace, for that kind introduction. I am coming to you today from the Slocan Valley, which is a portion of Sinixt, Tanaha, and Silk territory. It's been a cold spring here, and the forests that I live in show that. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. Can everyone see that?
No, not yet.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay. So I really appreciated the presentations to date. They weave together a lot of the things that I've been working on for many years, and it pleases me to see how that's spreading out across this country. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the difference between nature and standard urban development and how to move back towards nature. Let's see here. For me, it all starts with water, and water starts with drops. So remember that water is the connector, water is life, and water is everywhere. The other thing to remember about water is that it transmits energy, and we'll see a little bit how that energy gets distorted in standard urban development. But let's start with natural character, with natural ecosystems. In those systems, the vegetation and the fallen trees, the structures that make up those systems, including small ponds and wetlands like you see here, water and energy is dispersed in those systems. And because of that, things like floods and droughts are very infrequent. And we know that more floods and droughts have become a part of the climate change crisis. So if we compare that to urban development, where water and energy are contained or concentrated by a generally impermeable system, there in those situations, floods and droughts are common. That's not a result of natural ecosystem functioning. It's a result of our degradation of those natural systems. So if you look at that from above, as this is a portion of the Still Creek watershed in East Vancouver and a portion of Burnaby. If you look at that from up above and you start trying to think about how would I rebuild connectivity into that system, it very quickly becomes a big problem. You can see with these yellow lines how we tried initially to capture some remaining trees and shrubs, green areas, and then try to link them along old stream channels or channelized stream channels. But if you blow that up, you quickly see that there's many, many impediments. So there's a lack of connectivity here, and there's also a really pressing problem that Grace alluded to in her opening, and that's the heat island effect. All of that lack of vegetation cover, particularly tree cover, that's been replaced with asphalt and concrete. That asphalt and concrete soak up the heat of the day and increasing the heat of the day by up to 7 degrees Celsius, which also then gives off that heat at night, raising night temperatures even by 2 to 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. So we've got not only a problem ecologically here, we've got a problem that's related to human survival, particularly in the climate change era. So how do we start dealing with that? Well, I'm going to go back to water here. Protection and restoration of nature in cities needs to be built around a water movement network. And that water movement network is, first of all, defined by watersheds or a watershed that encompasses the urban area. If you look at this diagram, it's interesting to show how cities have distorted watersheds. The red line that you can see here on my cursor is following is the watershed boundaries if you do it block by block within that's the city. But if you reconstruct the actual topography that has been remade by the urban development, that's occurred there, that magenta line is a good approximation of what the actual watershed boundary was. And then you have to start thinking about all the sub-watersheds. And you can see all these light blue arrows here that are sitting on top of this image that shows the city below it. Those light blue arrows are my attempt using old topographic maps and local knowledge of indigenous and non-indigenous people to describe the sub-watersheds to the larger watershed. The colors here are just a digital elevation model that shows from these darker colors down through into the light green and green differences in elevation. So the water movement corridors or network also show you that as well. So that's the starting point. We need to see that big picture. And the goal is to develop protected ecological networks in cities. Those protected networks where development has not occurred, where you're not trying to restore areas, but protect ecosystems and nature, those protected networks in that situation need to be defined so that they limit where development occurs. It's not like do the development and then develop the network. Where development hasn't occurred, you define a protected ecosystem network and then fit development into that. But that's not the case in many instances. And so we have to move back to the beginning here, identify the watershed that we, like I just showed there with the water movement network, and describe its natural character. What was there before industrialized human civilizations decided to develop it into a city? And then there's three things to think about. Protect any existing fragments of natural character. Those are the anchors around which you build restoration. And then restore new fragments and anchors. So that's the restoration work, which I'll show you some pictures of here in a moment. And also restore the water movement network that we just talked about. That leads to the development of a restoration network that if you maintain it, and maintaining it is a really important step. You can't just do restoration once and walk away. Given what we've done, it will take decades of attention to maintenance of the restoration network to eventually arrive at a protected ecosystem network. In a place like Still Creek, you're easily in portions of that talking about generations to get from the restoration network to a protected network, decades and likely a century or more in some instances. So we're back to a reminder that we want to stay away from this kind of a picture where we have options, where we're starting to do something different. We definitely don't want to recreate this kind of development. We want to design networks of protected ecosystems from whole watersheds and large protected areas right down to individual patches. And then you fit people into that. The same kind of strategy can be applied not only in urban development, but when we're practicing forestry or agriculture or other activities like that, the same flow of thinking and the same establishment of protected networks is necessary. So let's look at some examples, because you can't wave a magic wand and have that whole sea of concrete and impermeable surfaces changed. But here's an example of a laneway. Instead of being paved over, which most of them are, and impermeable, this has been restored towards its natural character. You can see here along the center of these concrete pavers, there's permeable soil planted with grass and little bricks that hold it in place. Over here, there's cobbled pavers that are permeable as well. And gardens have been planted here, which hold moisture and keep the temperature down in this neighborhood. When I talked to people who live there, they said after a rainstorm, it was just a matter of minutes before the water was gone. It didn't pool like it does on impermeable surfaces. So here we've got water and energy dispersed again, maybe not as well as in a natural system, but it's been dispersed through natural vegetation and more natural water movement. And the benefits are big from an urban area. Floods and droughts are going to be less common. And as climate change comes at us, that is a big benefit, both socially and economically. These are some restoration concepts that can be applied in neighborhoods and in different situations. This is a single family residential area, which is an actual ortho image that I've superimposed a restoration strategy on. So this is talking about restoring multi-layered vegetation, which captures in water, infiltrates it, and lets it slowly seep and be maintained into the system. You can see here all the roofs of the houses are major problems because they're an impermeable water system. So they need to be converted to green roofs, which also cool. They filter water, remove pollutants, slow the movement of water in the system. Then you can also see all these driveways need to be changed to permeable surfaces. Small drain rock, for example, is permeable, and it allows water to work through the system in natural dispersed ways, and it doesn't your feet don't get dirty walking across it because it actually cleans your shoes. And then along the streets, all of the paved areas need to be converted to permeable surfaces, of which there are a growing number of options now. That used to be very unusual, but now there's many different products available. And then you also want to try to reestablish some of the dispersal of water. And we do that by establishing what I call rolling dips. That's what these red areas are. And you actually have excavate out an area of natural material that water seeps into and can disperse through the system and down the slopes, recreating again a more natural water movement system. This is kind of interesting because we were able in this situation, you see this green dashed line, to locate streams that were existed in 1825. And so you'll notice we tried to capture that in a couple of different ways here with rolling dips, with revegetating areas. So that's a one kind of a restoration concept. Here's another look at a schoolyard, which it incorporates a lot of the same features, but it also tries to retain some of the things that we think of as necessary in a schoolyard. Like this was a big open grassy field. Well, that can be changed again with some multi-layered vegetation around it, with bioswales, which I'll show you some pictures of, which capture water and then move it naturally into the system. The The school itself can be transformed with a green roof where people can grow food. Students can learn about the benefits of natural systems, which will expand the application of these kinds of restoration throughout the city. And once again, we're looking at streets being converted to permeable systems with rolling dips. This is also another stream that is actually a fork of Still Creek that shows the approximate location of that in 1825. I think this is a perfect place to, as part of restoration, to daylight that stream. In other words, excavate it, get it back into over time into a natural stream channel with big trees and vegetation, and that, what a great learning experience for students to be involved in that kind of restoration. So here's an example that you can find throughout cities: playgrounds associated with cities or parks. This is one in Vancouver, which could benefit immensely from replacing a whole lot of that green space with trees and shrubs, natural indigenous plants, multi-layered vegetation that captures more carbon, manages water better. We also want to be vigilant, as that diagram I showed earlier mentions, is that we want to protect remnants of nature. This is a remnant in a park, but there's also remnants like this that are privately owned outside of parks. And we need to put in place policies that provide incentives for people to protect these remnants of nature. This natural character is not only important in and of itself for its ecological benefits, and for that matter, social and economic benefits, but it also provides a place for people to learn about what we've lost and how to restore it. This is a picture from the Boston Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts, and it shows what green roofs can do. I'm a little bit foggy on the exact percentage, but I think the hospital now raises somewhere around 25 to 30% of the food that it needs for its patients involved in the hospital, and it's all done in this rooftop garden, and it's done organically. So you have healthy food, you manage water better, you filter and purify the water and move it more naturally into the system. So the other big thing about food and green roofs is we're talking about a way in an urban setting to develop food security, which moves us along that path towards social equity, which is badly needed. So let's also remember that the natural character of most of the areas in Canada, including even a lot of the prairie provinces, consisted of multi-layered vegetation. This is a picture of a West Coast multi-layered old growth forest, but those forests are the best at sequestering and storing carbon. They're the best at intercepting, storing, filtering, and then slowly releasing water. And they have the highest level of biological diversity. So we want to keep that model in mind when we think about how we structure and carry out our restoration. In contrast, you can also find, interestingly enough, areas within a city where people have maintained a semblance of that multi-layered vegetation around houses. And that's good. That's a good model. I mean, we need to get rid of the impermeable surfaces you can see in that photograph and do some of the other activities that I showed in that restoration concept. But by and large, the vegetation around this house is quite good. And in the heat dome or high temperatures, the people living there would benefit immensely from those multi-layered vegetation. Several people have mentioned public education, and I really want to endorse that. I think the public needs to understand that what we're talking about is not just ecologically good, but it's socially and economically good as well. The public education, by establishing food security, attracts people to these kinds of situations. This is associated with a school, so students are actively learning about food security and what you can do in a city. And you could add to that easily restoration of the natural character of the system. So just to kind of put this in focus of how we do it, we see this as a three-part process. It starts with scientists, traditional ecological knowledge, residents, to describe that natural character. And the water movement network that I talked about, that's where people in urban areas can actively initiate the kind of protection and restoration that we need to have. And then that needs to connect with governments so that they can expand beyond neighborhoods, but it also needs to be run through neighborhoods and communities. So describe the natural character, start doing it in people's backyards along the water movement network, and then bring government into the process so that it can be replicated beyond just the neighborhood and small watershed locale. So let me just close here with some examples of what people can do. Here's an example of a small rain garden. Instead of concrete, you can walk across that. It collects water and stores it and disperses it naturally into the system. Here's an example of a little larger rain garden or bioswale along the side of a street where the street's actually been taken out in places. Plants from low-lying plants to trees that can be planted there to start rebuilding natural character and managing water so that by the time it finds its way into a drain, it's been purified by natural systems. Here's an example of a rain garden from the beginning to the end in what looks like a pretty inhospitable place and a difficult place to change the current condition of an urban area back towards a natural kind of composition and structure. The first step is to get rid of the asphalt and to get rid of any of the unnatural overburden. You don't want lots of unfamiliar material or atypical material there. Here's what happened right after that material was removed. And you can see the water is still standing there. So there needs to be a way for water to be filtered and moved into the system naturally. So then soil was established. Natural topsoil was spread in the area. Then plants. Then it was planted with a lot of indigenous plants as well as some non-indigenous plants. And here's what happened then with the next rain. You can see how much of that water in a heavy rainstorm is being absorbed, filtered, purified, and moved into the system. And the last photograph here if you look right in the center of it, you can see that kind of dark brown material. Well, that represents a lot of the sediment that was captured here from and prevented from going into the storm drain or the water drainage system. So there's been a big ecological benefit from establishing this rain garden. So let me just close by reminding us that the neighborhood, people's backyards, is where this kind of restoration needs to be initiated. People in neighborhoods are a lot better able to do this than levels of government, which tend to get more abound with a lot of interests arguing with each other. And we need to remind ourselves that trees or forests are major components. This is in Renfrew Ravine. Look what kind of trees once were there, that big cedar stump. We want to get those back again for water conservation, both interception and dispersal of water, carbon sequestration and storage, lowering the air temperature and raising the humidity in areas, and increasing biodiversity. And then more finally, back to those water drops. I hope that's given you some ideas about what you can do in urban areas to restore nature. Thanks.
Thank you, Herb. That was really interesting. I just want to acknowledge that we're running a bit late, and Gertie and I are able to stay on. I know some people will have to leave, but the video will be available if you have to leave before we end, and we will take some questions after Kazusa. I'll just introduce Kazusa. Kazusa Nakajo is an eco-designer, a registered architect with green building accreditation, and a system thinker. She has a background in natural building, soil remediation, and bioengineering in Japan, and she integrates proactive design into her restoration work. She's currently studying restoration of natural systems at UVic, and she's passionate about sharing the importance of the soil food web and simple field techniques to enliven the soil and plants. Go ahead, Kazusa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the introduction. And thank you for all the panel's presentation. What Herb talked about water dispersion in the urban environment, I wanted to speak about how air can help the water movement under the soil. This is actually the first time that I share this knowledge in Canada, but there's like a huge movement of decompaction is happening in Japan. The landscape architect and the tree doctor that I learned from bioengineering techniques, there's a movie made, and it's just happening everywhere that people are getting interested in decompaction and air movement underground. Why? Why should everyone care about the air movement underground and decompaction? Because it helps with better roots development, and it helps with plant health. If the root development goes well, then the water retention is much better. So you need to water less. And sometimes, you know, we have like a misconception about root. Root can develop very, very deep if there's a proper microbiology in the soil. So if we can help decompact and note a few simple principles, concepts, then we can really help the plant house in the urban environment even if it's confined walled, but if it can go deep, that would really help. So my client and who let me work on their gardens in Japan about bioengineering and deep compaction treatment and restoration. After 6 months to 1 year, just decompaction alone, can sometimes it help with the soil. If that was enough to bring the good microbiology back to the soil, then yes, it can happen in 6 months to 1 year period with a simple technique. But if you can add good compost tea and a good good bacteria in the soil and fungi in the soil, then it can speed up. It can speed up to 1 season. So it's very hopeful that we can really speed up. And this is a bottom-up approach that any of us can do it. It's a very simple approach. So I've seen the site that I worked on, after 6 months to 2 years, the farmer and gardeners noticed the yield increase, taste, and the sugar content and water content improved. And why should homeowner care about it? Because if you don't like mosquito like me, by remediating the soil and helping with decompaction, the mosquito can disappear. And then the air quality can actually get way better. It's very exciting for homeowner. And also, not only that, Herb also talked about, the urban runoff filtration. The air movement is also very necessary to help with the water dispersion and infiltration, so that the dust and sludge doesn't sit on top of the soil, that it can go down. Without the air movement, it just sits on the top. Okay. And in some cases, in a very humid environment in Japan, one of the clients noticed that there's even less mold in the house. So if you can improve the garden environment, if you if your house is built on a swamp or something, then that can also help. And also notice the wind pattern change, because the air movement, even though how small it is, it can't maybe feel it, but wind is always moving. And with air in the soil moving, the wind patterns can change and can alleviate the heat island effect. And one more exciting things, if you can work on decompaction, it would really help with the carbon sequestration. Why? Because global warming gas does emit from the soil if your soil has an anaerobic environment. If the anaerobic environment is created, the bacteria would emit gas such as NO2, especially this NO2 nitrous oxide is a big concern. Why? Because 1 pound of the gas warms 1 pound of nitrous oxide gas warms the atmosphere some 265 times more than a pound of carbon. That's over a 100-year period. So having anaerobic compacted patches in your garden is a really bad thing. And it's a very common thing in urban environment. Everywhere we have impervious concrete. Everywhere we have retention wall. We have gutters. Everything is walled and confined with concrete. So just want to let you know, did you feel the soil health? What is healthy soil look like? It looks like the one at the left. It has aggregates where earthworm can move around and the roots can go deep. I said the most plants cannot move through a compacted soil like this. And there's a device to measure it. Over 150 psi of compaction, no soil, no roots can grow. So you want to make sure that your soil looks like this, not this. So this illustration help you see how the air and the water moves together. If the air, which is a dark blue, if it's compacted, then it's gonna be just a runoff, and then the root underneath would, it can go deep because the red dot means like, stagnation, stagnant air and water. So if it's stagnant, you have a compaction layer, then your roots stop there. And then that happens very, very often in an urban environment. So we want this. We don't want compaction layer. What can we do? The effect of compaction is roots can breathe, lack of oxygen means death of good bacteria, and also it creates other toxic compound. Anaerobic bacteria create alcohol, which is super toxic to any plants. With very little amount, 1 ppm can kill any plant cell wall. And formaldehyde too, you don't want to preserve your root. You want it to be alive, right? Okay, so the cause of compaction, even raindrop, the pressure from the raindrop can really add up and then create compaction. So you don't want any bare soil. And foot traffic, human, we can, walk everywhere, but also our pet too. Toxic chemical, toxic chemical is produced in anaerobic compacted soil, and also structure. So Herb talked about impervious pavement and road. I'm going to skip that, and then I'm going to talk about gutter and retention wall. So urban environment, you're going to see concrete wall, RC building, you have pretty much all the coverage, and the road, even sometimes ditched river, like a water course or gutters. Everything is wrapped with concrete. But what does it create? All the red area, you're gonna have severe compaction, and there's no air movement, or if there's no air movement, that means there's no water movement. So this is not what we want. We want this underneath. You want that you want the riverbed to be breathable. You want the slope leading to the river to have some plants on it. This is actually very important. I'm going to explain it later in detail. So retention wall, it can also stop the water and airflow. So when the compaction gets serious after these structures are built, then there's no water movement. Even there's like a soil. So this is macro scale, is in a dam situation, but it also, if you have like a pond like this, so this water doesn't move and the air doesn't move, then water doesn't move either. Okay, if you want the healthy, the underground of the soil, it's like, like our body, like a micro vein and vein, and the earth has vein, and this is earth's blood, the broad vein. We want it to have that, otherwise the earth is going to be dying in a very large scale. So on the landscape scale, this is actually a very common practice of design. So people have U-gutter at the bottom of a hill or like a slope. And what it does, it actually really deters the flow of water. And in some cases, this flow, where this point is blocked, a very tall hill can actually be unhealthy. So you don't want this. A U-gutter, if you have, this is a common, modern U-gutter design, but it doesn't let any air movement or water movement. But if you have a garden or your agricultural field that you want to create, then you need to think about how to aerate the water the ditches well, very well. And this is a traditional Japanese design, that's ancient Japanese design that has like a stone, and then in between there's a straw. Straw would sandwich in between because it would bring beneficial microorganisms. So that was the ancient knowledge. And then they plant trees on top of it, so tree roots can further aerate. So some of the urban environment, what can we do? You know, we already have Yugata built. What can we do? So this is some of the restoration approach that I had in Japan. So you have like Yugata like this, and then there's a concrete pavement. Oh, sorry. Then in some case we drilled it with heavy machinery. And then we cut the rebar that's running in between and created a gap so the water can flow. Otherwise, this whole place, this is actually post-disaster remediation project in Japan. And then this site was flooded, and then 5,000 people lost home. And I went for a volunteer, and this site particularly was walled. You know, it was a bit taller, and this so it was all walled on the, and in between there's this garden, and the water accumulated in there with the flooding couldn't get anywhere, so it was saturated the whole time, even after 6 months. So we were called in to deal with the problem. And then so yeah, if you can create connections, or even like break partial, if you can even break the wall partially, that is still going to help a lot. And we buried with stones, so people would not fall in, and then we're going to cover with soil later. So that was, and then this is another, so this is a house that was stripped to the studs because it was flooded. It was a wooden construction and the water wasn't moving. What do we do then? This is a biochar actually. And then it's actually very small, like just 15 centimeter. And then you created a cone like this and then put the biochar. And after 30 minutes, it started to move. And it didn't move for 6 months. You know, the simple technique like that. If you have like a water sitting on it, like after a flood or event or something, and then you want the more water movement, this can be a very, very simple thing that you can try. So, okay, to compaction and anaerobic environment, how can you detect if there's no airflow? So mosquito is everywhere. If that's the case, you can suspect. And water puddle sitting on the garden for more than 5 minutes, even 5 minutes, yes, that means not healthy. And you can measure the decompaction with a penetrometer. It's a specific device that to measure the compaction level. And if you can smell, can you smell vinegar, sour milk, puke, or butcher meat? Anything disgusting, trust your senses. If there's something disgusting smelled in your garden, there's a chance that something is wrong in your garden. So it's a simple detection. So what can we do to help with decompaction? With the simple things that you can do. So cover bare soil in an urban bound. If you find any bare soil, that's a very bad thing because it would eventually lead to compaction, and compaction will lead to disease or flooding or other problems. So, and design construction planning, like if you think about the connectivity of the water and then water movements, think about your slope and then where your home sits and how water may move. It's a simple, everybody knows how water moves, it follows the gravity. So, and depaving. The depaving movement is going on not only in Japan, but also in the States, in Seattle. So if you find any areas that you think that, you know, it's not necessary to have concrete cover, then depave. Alternatively, if you have like a garden that you're going to work on, you can use air spade, you know, aerate the garden. And a service like that you can ask for. Stay on the trail when you walk, especially in the urban forest, because, you know, so many people move just everywhere, but every step you create a compaction. Imagine the air underneath. If you're stepping on a waffle, you know, it can crash. If the soil feels very solid, then it's already compacted. And help fungi hyphae to grow. You know, fungi hyphae is a carbon storage. So if you can have more fungi in your garden, that is really going to help with carbon sequestration too. And if you want to go deeper, there's a online course that's called Soil Food Web, and then you can learn a lot about soil microbiology, and all the things that I talk about and more. Yeah, so thank you very much for listening. I hope this gives you some idea of a simple restoration technique or a restoration concept. And yeah, there's lots we can do as an individual level, and that can create a big impact in the urban forest. Thank you for listening, and happy Earth Day.
Thank you so much, Kazusa. So we can take a few questions. You can put your hand up with using the yellow hand, or you can put your question in the chat, and Jan will let us know what the questions are. If there isn't a question yet, I wanted to ask Herb.
Francis has a question.
Oh, Francis, go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone. That was absolutely incredible. One of our understandings that we keep running into is that there's such thing as, at least in British Columbia, I'm not sure about the rest of Canada, there's such thing as an urban tree charter. And we have been trying forever to figure out, how do you get into the government, or how can we find some legal way to change that tree charter so that it basically, for those who aren't aware of it, what it implies is that no trees should stand in the way of development, even if it's a protected species. So I guess if anybody has any great ideas how we could overturn that charter and get this unpaving movement going too, I think this is brilliant.
I may jump on that one because of the urban forest policies. Every municipality has its own policy that it's nested within the provincial legislation. Unfortunately, most of our provinces, urban forestry and urban areas are not necessarily on their radar. The federal government, everything what they do, it's at the level of recommendation. As we know, the power is in provincial hands. Some municipalities that are more advanced, they have a tree protection bylaws. With all fairness, I do believe that many of them do not work, because that's where it comes. You have a tree protection policy, but then the land use planning policies overtop that. Yeah, again, along the lines, I think it's that disconnect that we think in some cases that we have policies, but there is always policy above the policy. And it boils down to the land use planning policy, which let's say for Southern Ontario, everything gets governed by the provincial policy statement. Crown land, it's governed by different rules. And even within, let's say, the lands that we have, you may have parks and protected areas, they are governed under different rules. So again, for urban areas without land use planning, official plans and whatever mechanisms we have, I don't think that we can do much. I'm not aware of the tree charter. I haven't heard about that in Ontario. That's interesting that might be working hopefully not in some provinces, but not in Ontario.
Okay, thanks. It's just so disheartening because it feels hopeless, really, is what it feels like. But surely, if we created this mess, we can uncreate it, as has, Paul so wisely said. So I really believe when there's a will, there's a way, and I think people really care a lot about trees, a lot more. I mean, we've seen cases of it where, it really did surprise our city officials. And so we've had some clout, and I know we can have clout collectively. It's just a matter of, what do we need? Do we need a legal advisor? What do we?
Yeah, thank you, Francis. That's a great question and good response. Yeah, here in our North Saanich, or they call it North Saanich municipality, they have an old bylaw, genocidal bylaw about it's if you buy property and no matter what it looks like, you can just check agriculture and you can kill everything without a permit, no EIS, nothing, no environmental impact, nothing. It's a genocidal policy designed to destroy indigenous people and our way of life. And it's still on their books. So a man bought some property right on their unceded and unsurrendered lands. By the way, I'm not First Nations. That's a governmental policy. A lot of our people don't like that term. We are not little nations like Seout, Shothlip, Sycam. Those are those are not tribes. Those are village sites. And we are Saanich Nation with our introduction of our Saanich Tribal Council, proclaiming our unceded and unsurrendered status to both governments of what they call British Columbia, what they call Canada, that we mark treaty only for peace, to save our ancient forest. Milder said we fought to the death to save our ancient forest, and that's an ecosystem. And he said, why would we give our lives for an ancient forest? He said, we understood then and we do now. If they destroy that, they destroy our ability to live as the Creator intended us to live, as human beings. And that's true for each and every one of us. We're intended to live in harmony and peace. And that's a human trait. A baby isn't born saying, I think I'll just go destroy indigenous people and the home of the animal people. I'll cut every tree down. I'll destroy the water. I'll cover it up. I'll pollute the world's oceans. I'll cause suffering of trillions in the destruction of trillions of natural beings, countless natural beings. A baby doesn't born that way. But greed, dominance, control, and racism that moves into a human spirit, where a human spirit lives, will do those things. And so our education system of our First Peoples, as David Suzuki had mentioned, brilliant scientist in what they call British Columbia, he said, until we adopt the governance systems of the First Peoples, we'll keep heading towards this path of destruction, because nobody's talking about where we're going, all bureaucratic. US and Canada, what they call US and Canada, said, but our first peoples have always had direction given to us by the elders, by the matriarchs. The life giver speaks for life. So yeah, you know, I had to chain myself to a tree, me and a friend, because we weren't getting anywhere with the you know, council, municipality council, and the RCMP showed up, and their way of dealing with us was, we're between two trees, and we have two trees on each side of us, so we won't fit between them. Their way of dealing with peaceful people, indigenous people, is to pull as hard as they can on one side of that bike lock as we are yelling, hey, you know, you're going to kill us. We can't get out from between these trees. They didn't assess it. They didn't talk to us. They just started pulling. And then the other RCMP came around and kicked me in the groin, took my drum and threw it. And, you know, that's what we see as indigenous people protecting our unceded land. The violence of colonialism against our bodies, against our culture, against our children, against our birthright for clean water and clean air and ecosystems to keep us alive. So colonialism, those powers, they won't stop. They're holding a grip, a clenched fist until we educate people, until about why all these things that were spoken are beautiful and amazing and inspiring. Every single speaker. But the general public needs to know why these things are important. And the First Peoples can explain it in a holistic way, not a scientific way, not speaking of biology and environment, but speaking of our humanness, of who we are, and how we culminated true human spirit in every child. I share with children in grade schools and camps, and they all get these understandings as I explain them in different ways right away. So that's my advocacy. Lock yourself to a tree until the insanity of colonialism is healed. And it's going to take each and every one of us to heal this insanity. And, you know, do it in a prayerful way, do it in a peaceful way, do it in the most indigenous way you can. And as a matter of fact, get a hold of our people, because a lot of us still understand who we are. And we'll come together. You know, we need to come together. One human family standing up against a culture of death. And that has brought that to our lands.
Yeah, we hear you, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. I think, you know, it's been just an excellent 2 hours together. And I think Paul ends it today in a good way, in a very good way. And I'm very grateful for your wisdom and your voice today. So thank you everyone for coming, and for all the speakers today. I mean, we can do it, Paul. You're right, we can do it.
Yeah, we can. And we're doing it.
And we're doing it.
Yeah, we are. That's
Thanks,
good.
Gertie. And if Frances is still here, maybe she could tell us a little bit about the
the super